And today, already here with us, two of our resource person for today's webinar, which entitled the assessment on the fisheries tax to promote sustainable fisheries management in Indonesia. So let me introduce two speakers for today. The first is Mr. Satoshi Yamazaki. He is actually the senior lecturer in economics from Tasmanian School of Business and Economics. And also already here with us, Ibu Alin Halimatussadiah. She is actually the head of Environmental Economics Research Group in LPEM UI, and she is also the lecturer in the Faculty of Economics, Fakultas Ekonomi Universitas Indonesia. So without wasting any more time, I think, I have to clarify several rules. So, So yeah, actually all the participants will be muted throughout the presentations. Will take probably around 20 minutes. And then after that, I will allow maybe 3 persons in each Q&A section. And then if you have a question, you can just use the raise your hands so I can see you in the participants list. And then once I choose the person, so he can deliver his or her questions. Okay, so I think Mr. Satoshi and Ibu Alin, the floor is yours.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Bisuk, for your kind introduction. Good morning, all. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I hope you are all safe and healthy. So I want to share slides. Can I share a slide? Okay.
Shares, yeah.
So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So we would like to present our latest study on fisheries tax in Indonesia. The idea of this study is we want to look whether fisheries tax can be a good tool or instrument for managing fisheries exploitation in a sustainable way, besides its function to generate revenue for the government. I will present this slide with my colleague Satoshi Yamazaki from University of Tasmania, Australia. So our team consists of Satoshi, Pak Budi Wardono from KKP, Pak Syarif Mulyadi from Ministry of Finance, Ibu Umi Muawana from Ministry of Marine and Fisheries, and we get an excellent assistant from Wisnu and Rati. So this study supported by Conservation Strategy Fund, and this is a collaboration between UI, University of Tasmania, KKP, BKF, ya, Kemenq, and IPB also. Yeah, so we have the main objective of assessing the current fisheries tax in Indonesia and simulate whether we have a better alternative for that. But to do that, we also identify what it means by sustainable. So we define sustainability criteria, and then we also learn from other countries the best practice of imposing this tax or other instrument for sustainable fisheries. And also we examine Indonesian regulation review, particularly regarding this fisheries tax. And then using the model developed by Satoshi, we simulate the fisheries tax, whether we want to introduce alternative in terms of a scheme and the rate of the tax, yeah, that can be imposed to fisheries both for small and large scale. And we also, based on that simulation, we give a policy recommendation. Maybe as we know, we have 11 FMAs. FMAs is like a province in the land, but it is like province in the sea. And we have quite a lot potential of fish, yeah. and it contributes to our GDP about 2 and 6%. Yeah, but we have quite many problems in managing our fisheries. First is overall we can say that we have mismanaged our fishery supervision that lead to many cases of IUU, illegal, unreported, and unregulated case, and it lead also to overfishing problem. On the other side, we also have the problem of non-optimal revenue from the for the government because we have insufficient fiscal tools. This is a map describing the stock status of based on type of fish, and if we can see the red one, it represents overexploited fish. The yellow one, fully exploited, and the green one, moderate level. Yeah. So we can see that some of the FMAs, have this problem of overexploited, such as in WPP 715. Most of type of fish is threatened, and only few FMAs have this green, this green one. So overall, we can say that our fisheries is not managed well, and we want to see whether this fisheries tax instrument can move toward more sustainable fisheries in Indonesia. Okay, so if we look at the contribution of fisheries tax compared to other sectors, we can see that this fisheries tax contribute about 2.3% of the GDP, but for PNBP, this is the tax collected from the fisheries sectors is only 0.2, about 0.2. If we compare to the forestry, for example, this sector contribute only 1.6%, but the PNBP of this sector over the total PNBP, it contributes 1.5%. And if we compare to coal, the ratio is quite high, 6.5%. So from this data, maybe we can say that this fisheries sector not contribute that much to government revenue. So what kind of tax scheme imposed to fisheries sector? Over this study, we always said fisheries sector, but from this government revenue record in Indonesia, we differentiate between tax and non-tax revenue. So PNBP, penerimaan negara bukan pajak, is non-tax revenue, and this sectoral tax is actually most of the sectoral tax put in this PNBP. But over this study, we said the non-tax revenue is tax. So this fisheries tax, we can put this fisheries tax in this non-tax revenue. And what kind of tax? We have two kind of tax. First is PPP, pungutan pengusahaan perikanan, and PHP, pungutan hasil perikanan. This PPP, we can say this PPP as the license tax. So this tax is imposed based on the ownership of the boat or the use of the boat, this PPP. And then for PHP, pungutan hasil perikanan, the government intend to set this is the production-based tax. But we can discuss it later because although the idea is to impose tax both based on production, but the basis is ex ante. So the fishermen paid this tax at the beginning of the year based on the estimation of the production. Yeah, so this has become the problem. So it is not from the actual catch, but the estimated catch, and the estimated catch is based on, one of them is the scale of the boat or the size of the boat, and also the assumption of ship productivity. Okay, so if we look at the realization of PNBP for the last 8 or 10 years, we can see actually no trends, yeah. Because for example, in 2010, the realization is about 60%, but it jumps to almost 150%. Because of what? We can see that the target is not increasing, yeah, but the realization is increasing. So after that, maybe the government evaluate this, and then after that, the target is increasing over time until it reach almost 1 trillion. But the problem is, as we increase the target, the realization decrease also. So the government finally reduce the target. So the problem of this realization is putting the appropriate target. Yeah. Next, yeah, how this tax impact the behavior of the fishermen in choosing the vessel size. Yeah, if you look at this graph, we can see that for small scale, small vessel, the number of small vessels in Indonesia is very high. Yeah, about more than 9,000. But if as we reduce the size, the number is decreasing. Yeah, decreasing until it reach 11 for very large vessel. But the problem is this decreasing trends. We have distraction here. Yeah. For the tax, for the vessel size, 30 until 50 GT. Why is that? Because actually this tax, the tax that I mentioned before, imposed for the vessel size 30 GT and above. So actually we can say no fisheries tax imposed for boat less than 30 GTs. Some province impose like retribution of like license fee, but it only for small amount, and not all of the province impose that kind of tax for small. Yeah, so most of the vessel concentrate at this level, and we can see, for example, in Bali, 75% of the boat have this range. Yeah, between not between 20 and 30, it is between 25 and 30. It's like, you know, very close to the line of 30 GT. So maybe we can see that, yeah, this is an effort of avoid tax. Yeah. So yeah, this is our rough mapping of our lesson learned from other countries. So most of the developed countries have moved beyond the fisheries tax. They implement what's so-called ITQs. It's like quota for fish, but this is tradable. But we see that they also have some combination. For example, in New Zealand, they combine these ITQs and also the tax. So if the quota exceed the catch exceed the quota, they also impose tax. So and for some countries, they prefer tax more, maybe because of the managing those kind of policy, like for enforcement, it is more simple than for ITQs. So next, I want to describe the data that we use for the model. So Satoshi will give detailed explanation about the model, but I want to just give you a brief description what kind of data that we use in the model. So we use bioeconomic model to simulate our tax scheme. And since this bioeconomic model can be applied for a single species, so we choose this skipjack. Yeah, we use this skipjack. Why we use this skipjack? Because this skipjack is one of Indonesia's important product. Yeah, we have tuna, tongkol, cakalang. Yeah, and this skipjack is among these groups. Yeah, and the skipjack can be used for both small vessel and large vessel, because for tuna, for example, most of this tuna is taken by only a large vessel. In some area, small vessel also took tuna, but most of tuna taken by a large vessel. But for this skipjack, it's taken both by large vessel and small vessel. And the data that we need is carrying capacity. The capacity of one space in the sea to accommodate certain biomass or the volume of the fish. Yeah, and then we can see that we also need the number of vessels and the number of harvests, both for small vessel and large vessel. Well, why we differentiate between small and large? Because in our model we differentiate this, and we define small vessel is the vessel less than 30 GT. We can see from this pie chart, we have very a lot of number of small vessel compared to large vessel, and the harvest of small vessel also dominates. But as we know that this large vessel can take many fish, so the proportion is not as much as the number of vessel. And then we also need data for intrinsic growth of this skipjack. Intrinsic growth is the growth of the skipjack at the initial level, at the level of very few fish. Yeah, so we can see that this is initial level, and we taken from other studies to impose in our model. And we also need the price, the average price of the skipjack, and then we also estimate the average weighted average of PHP and weighted average of PPP. Okay, so we also search for cost for small vessel and large vessel to operate, and we get it from other studies by Natsir, Wijayanto, and Muawana. Yeah, so after this, I will give it to Satoshi that will explain about the model and the result. Yeah, this Satoshi. I will stop my screen and you can share your screen.
Hey, thank you. Do you see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. So I will present the modeling part of this project. So as Alin presented, now these current fisheries tax systems in Indonesia's only target the large vessels. And the instrument they use, there are two types. One is the license fee, so on the boat and also on the productions. But these are imposed before the season. So depending on whether they participate in the fisheries and whether they have intention to catch any fish. So the purpose of doing this modeling exercise is we want to answer these three questions. So how large and small vessels responded to the current systems, and how each type of vessel would respond to the different designs. So we are interested in whether we can improve the current systems and whether fishery outcomes and the government revenue can be improved. So we are trying to evaluate the outcome of different tax designs against the different the indicators. And when we do a policies study, the challenge is how the fishing vessels respond to the policy changes. And it is important to understand such the behavioral responses of the fisheries users, because it is one of the biggest uncertainty we have in the fisheries management. So before the implementation, we may intend that, okay, this policy A may increase catch or profitability, or may achieve the conservation objectives. But whether these objectives can be achieved or not depends on how fisheries users respond to the policy changes. But again, the difficulty here is we don't really have a data at the vessel level. So we don't quite know how these large and small vessels respond to the policy changes. So that's why we decided to develop the bioeconomic model, which can provide an analytical framework which can be used to analyze those three questions we raised in the previous slides. So let me briefly explain the overview of this model we developed in the project. So this bioeconomic model is at the vessel level. So the textbook bioeconomic model is at the fishery level. So they are looking at what would be the total catch, what would be the total fishing effort, what would be the total biomass in the fisheries. But we are trying to break this into the vessel level so that we can incorporate both large vessel and small vessels, and we can look at how each type of vessel respond to the policy changes respectively. And these two vessels are different in a number of ways. So first, the number of vessels is different. So as Alin presented, in Indonesia, we have many small vessels and a small number of large vessels. And also these two vessel types are different in terms of fishing power, so which is captured through what we call catchability coefficient. So the large vessels can catch more fish for a given fishing effort and the biomass level. Also, they are different in terms of the fishing cost, and they are also different in terms of the regulations they are subject to as well. So in the current systems, the large vessels are subject to PHP and PPP, but not for the small vessels. And these models can incorporate three key interactions. So I think better to use the next slide. So first of all, it captures the relationship between what each type of vessels do and how their behaviors affect to the fish stocks. So obviously, if they catch more, then we have less fish in the oceans, which affect the growth of the biomass. So that is the first interactions we incorporate. The second interaction is the interactions between the large and the small vessels. So this is the situations where what's optimal behavior for the large vessels depends on what small vessels do. And the same for the small vessels. What's their optimal behaviors depends on what large vessels do. So this is the second key interactions we incorporate in the model. And the third one is the policy interactions. So given the policy changes, each of the large and the small vessels respond to the policy changes, and which eventually result in a change in the fish biomass dynamics as well. So using this model, what we like to do is we like to first analyze what are the implications of the current tax scheme, which is consist of PHP and the PPP. And we also want to analyze the alternative policy scenarios. Here, particularly, we focused on the production-based tax. So instead of imposing some fee at the beginning of the seasons, now each vessels has to pay depending on what fishing activities have been taken during the seasons. So this is a payment at the end of the season instead of the beginnings. And we also look at what will be the distributional effect. So how these policy changes affect the distribution of the large and the small vessels. But this is in terms of the harvest, so how much fish are caught by large and the small vessels respectively. Okay. Right, so let me go through our model. So the first component is the biomass dynamics. So this one basically captures how the size of fish stocks changes depending on the first term is the fish growth, which depends on the current size of the fish stocks. And there are two types of the vessel. One is a large vessels. So this is a harvest by the large vessels. And this is a harvest by the small vessels. And we have NL number of large vessels and NS numbers of small vessels. And the second component is harvest and effort relationships. So how much the large vessel catch depends on their fishing power, which is Q. Also, how many days, what is their fishing effort E, and also depends on how much fish stocks we have for that season. And the same things can be said for the small vessels as well. So this is most the fundamental relationship we have in the model. And what each type of vessels do is basically they choose their fishing effort so that they can maximize their fishing profit. So these two equations shows the fishing profit for large vessels and the small vessels. So this P times H is a total revenues. We have a variable cost. We have a fixed cost. But for the large vessel, they are also subject to fisheries tax, PPP and PHP as well. But for the small vessel, we have again the revenues, P times H, variable cost and the fixed cost. But for them, they don't have PPP and PHP in the profit functions. So again, they're trying to choose their fishing effort so that their fishing profit can be maximized. And by solving that optimization problem, we can find what would be the optimal effort choice for each type of vessel. So the first equation is for the large vessel, and the second equation is for the small vessels. So equation is a bit messy, but what essentially we like to show here is that, first of all, what is the optimal choice of fishing effort for large vessel depends on the number of small vessels and the fishing effort of the small vessels. And the same for the small vessels. Their optimal choice depends on what large vessels do. So you can see in this way, these two types of the vessels are interacting to each other. And another things you can find from these equations is that you cannot see PPP and the PHP. So what that means is that the optimal choice of the fishing effort for both types, large and small vessels, PPP and the PHP do not affect. So that means this is one of our key results. So in the current design of the fisheries tax, they don't really do anything about their fishing effort, the choice of the fishing effort by both large and the small vessels. What the current system basically does is to influence the entry and exit decisions of the fishing vessels. And this is partly you can see in the data. So earlier, Alin showed that the number of vessels between 30 and 50 GT is quite small. And this is the entry and exit decisions. So given the current policy designs, those vessels around 30 and 50 decided to exit from the fisheries, whereas people try to enter around 25 and 30 GT. So this finding is partly reflected in the current data as well. So what we suggest now is instead of imposing the fee in ex ante, we can probably impose the tax depending on what fishing activity each vessel takes. So we slightly modify the profit functions for the large and the small vessels. And only the difference is this pre-multiply factors 1 minus tau for the large vessel and 1 minus lambda for the small vessels. So here what we are saying is that part of the fishing revenues will be taken by the government as a tax. So our question is then, how does each type of vessels respond to this kind of policy changes? So again, these two equations show the optimal response of large and the small vessels. And then now you can see we have this extra term of 1 minus tau here and 1 minus lambda here. So that means the optimal choice of the fishing effort by large and the small vessels depends on the tax rate on their fishing revenues. But from here, because the equation is getting bigger and bigger, so instead of looking at this relationship analytically, we decided to do a simulations. So here's the simulation results, which shows that how the small and the large vessels respond to this production-based tax. So this lambda is the tax rate for the small vessels, and this tau is a production tax for the large vessels. And what you can see is that when the small vessels tax rate increases, then the share of the harvest of the small vessels quickly becomes zero. So that means once the small vessels are exposed to this kind of production-based tax, then it becomes too expensive for them to continue in fishing. That's why they just give up and exit from the fisheries. While the large vessels, you can see that when the tax is imposed on a large vessel, then the share of the harvest for the small vessels increases. This is because some of the large vessels decided to reduce their catch or decided to exit from the fishery. And that is replaced by the catch by small vessel. So that means there is some substitutions between the large and the small vessels, the harvest. And these two graphs basically show the previous surface, but this one more clearly show how small and large vessels respond to this production-based tax. So for example, you can see that this black line is the change in the small vessels harvest, given that there is no production tax for the large vessels. And as we saw before, you can see that they will quickly become zero. That means it becomes too expensive for the small vessels to continue participating in the fisheries. Therefore, they give up the whole. But when some production tax is imposed on a large vessel, so let's say now 20% of the production tax is imposed on the large vessel, then the small vessels try to be in the fisheries until the production tax becomes relatively high. And for the large vessels, you can see similar qualitative relationship, but for them, they have stronger incentive to stay in the fisheries despite the higher the production tax. This is because they are more efficient, so they can survive with this production tax. We also look at how the fisheries profit and the tax revenue changes to these kind of changes. So you can see for fisheries profit, when the production tax is imposed on small vessels, then actually the fisheries profit increases. This is because those harvests which used to be taken by the small vessels is now taken by the large vessel. And the large vessel is more efficient. That's why the overall fishery profit can increase by basically kicking out the small vessels. And then now fisheries is just dominated by the large vessels. So that means there is efficiency gains, but in terms of the equity, we have a trade-off here because now all the profit is taken by the large vessels. And we don't see that for the large vessels production tax. This is because now the harvest which was taken by the large vessel is taken by the small vessel now, but small vessels are less efficient. Therefore, the overall fisheries profit declines when the large vessels production tax is imposed. The tax revenue is interesting because when the production tax is imposed only for the small vessel, then we don't really realize any tax revenues. And this is because small vessels is quite responsive to this kind of tax. Therefore, they quickly exit. And if they don't exist in the fisheries, then of course the government cannot collect any tax revenues anymore. That's why there is no tax revenues when only the small vessels are exposed to the production-based tax. And we see that moderate increase in the production tax revenues when the production tax is imposed in large vessels. But if the rate is too high, then again, that discourages the large vessels. So from the tax revenues perspectives, it seems the optimal way is to impose the tax on the both large and the small vessels, so that the balance between these two types of the vessels remain the same. So we keep basically both types of the vessels. We can also look at where the tax revenues come from. And the actual implementation of this kind of tax schemes is not straightforward, because as Alin presented earlier, there are many small vessels, and typically they are not monitored well. And that's part of the reason why we struggle so much to collect the data. So I guess the most realistic way is the tax, this kind of the tax schemes is imposed by the at the different institutional level. So probably the behavior of the small vessels may be better monitored by the local government, whereas the large vessels' behaviors may be better monitored by the central government. So in that case, the imposing more tax on the small vessels means the tax revenue is realized to the local government, whereas the production tax to the large vessels mean that more tax revenues to the central the government. And this is how the biomass respond. So you can see when the production tax is imposed to the both vessels, that seems a way we can increase the biomass in the most efficient way. And this is because now both types of the vessels are discouraged to fish. That's why they can increase the biomass in the fisheries. Whereas if the production-based tax is imposed on the large vessels only, then basically we don't achieve any increase in the biomass. This is because the reduction of the catch by the large vessel is now substituted by the increase in the catch by small vessels. So that's why this mix of production-based tax between the large and small vessels seems quite important in terms of the conservation's achieving the conservation goal. And this is the last result. So we decided to look at then what would be the optimal tax rate depending on what government want to achieve. So this is basically the summary of those three-dimensional diagrams. So for example, if the government wants to maximize the overall fisheries profit, then it seems that imposing some tax on the small vessels, they're basically kicking them out from the fisheries, and then now fisheries is dominated by only those efficient large vessels. In this way, the overall fisheries profit is maximized, but there is a significant implications on the distribution of the fisheries profit between the large and the small vessels. Similarly, if we just want to maximize large vessels profit or small vessels profit, then obviously we need to kick out the other types of the vessel types. I think more interesting is these tax revenues and biomass. So it suggests that if we want to maximize the tax revenues, or if we want to maximize the fish biomass so that more increase the sustainability, biological sustainability of the fisheries, then they suggest that imposing this kind of production-based tax on both large and small vessels is important. Okay, so let me summarize the key messages from this modeling exercise. So first of all, the effect of the production-based tax on the large and small vessels harvest are expected. So there is a substitution between this harvest by the large and the small vessels. But at the same time, the way these types of the vessels respond to production-based tax is different, because their fishing cost or the fishing power is different. So the small vessels are more responsive to the tax, especially only small vessels are taxed. So that means the production tax on the small vessels increases overall fishery profit, but this forces the small vessels to exit from the fisheries. So there is a significant distributional implications of such the tax schemes, because the profit and equity trade-off is prevalent. And also we saw that taxing on the large vessel is not a good idea, because the reduction of the harvest by the large vessel will be substituted by the increase in the catch by small vessel. So it seems imposing the production tax on both large and the small vessel seems reasonable. But it has this impose significant challenges for the policy design, because it requires significant monitoring for the behavior of both large and the small vessels. And it also requires the coordinations at the different level of the institutions. So the small vessels, it is difficult to monitor by the central government. So we need some effort at the local level. And that need to be complemented by the monitoring of the large vessels, which may be implemented by the central level government. Okay, thank you. I stop here.
Yeah. Bisuk, I think your microphone is off.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Satoshi and Ibu Alin, for the presentation. So yeah, basically the fisheries is not something that widely discussed in Indonesia. And I think there are some key takeaways that we can actually draw from the presentation. And we can see how actually the small and the large vessels behave differently to the fisheries tax, especially regarding to the substitutions, either whether the small vessels will harvest more or something like that. And also how actually imposing tax only on the large vessels is also interesting. Also, taxing on the large vessels will not increase the biomass, which is also interesting in my opinion. So, without wasting any more time, I'm going to open the first Q&A session. So, anyone who wants to ask? So we have Pak Arianto Patunru. We are waiting for another two, actually.
I would like to ask a question. I cannot use the raise hand function because I'm a co-host, but if no one is asking a question, I would like to pose one.
All right. So I think we'll allow the first two questions first. I think from Pak Arianto Patunru, please.
Thank you so much. Salam Alin. Konnichiwa Yamazaki-san. Thank you for the excellent presentations. First clarification, so the production-based tax, the PHP or PHP, the existing one is imposed ex ante. Is that right? So, and that I think is the reason why it drops from your Lagrange, your optimization problem, because the fishermen the PHP drops from their decision at the margin, right? And then you put these two taxes, tau and gamma, if I remember correctly, but internalize them in their decision making. So now it's there. But in reality, you also alluded to the fact that it's very difficult to monitor this. So do you think when we apply this in practice, can we do it ex post, in the sense that the patrol or the police or whatever control, they can actually monitor the catch and then calculate the tax they have to pay and things like that? And also related to this practice, is it even possible to simplify the mechanism by which or in which you actually use ad valorem kind of tax, right? So rather than by types of vessel, small or large vessel, it's by tonnage of catch, or if it's very difficult to monitor, you can actually do it again ex ante by the tonnage of the vessels, so GT. So ad valorem tax based on the GT. Is it possible? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Pak Rianto Patonru. Please, Ibu Lydia.
Thanks. What I would like to ask is about, you didn't raise anything about compliance. When I see the percentage of the target and the realization, it looks very erratic. Sometimes it's 15% of the target, and then it's over 122% and so on. So is this, are you confident in the data and what is happening here? Is it a matter of choosing the wrong target or something else? Also, in terms of biomass, so if the tax rate is optimal and you see an increase in biomass, that means it's more efficient. It's likely, given everything else equal, then harvesting activities will be more efficient, and you will see entry into the fisheries, assuming that the entry is not restricted. So is the higher biomass actually a target, or do we just want no overfishing? I think that's the question. Thanks.
Thank you, Ibu Lydia. So please, Ibu Alin and Pak Satoshi to answer. Which question do you prefer to answer first, actually?
Maybe I'll try to answer first, and then Satoshi can add, yeah. Because it will be harder for me to answer after Satoshi. So let Satoshi answer after me. Okay, so first is from Mas Aco, yeah. Can we do it exposed? I mean that it is based on the actual catch, yeah. Using the simulation, we can do that, but in reality, we have many challenges. Yeah, we have many challenges. But I think we have to start this, because if we want to impose this fisheries tax based on production, and then this production based on actual catch, we have to collect the data. Because now the data on catch itself, particularly for a small vessel, is not not managed well, not valid, not accurate, not reliable. So what I mean is we need this kind of data to manage our fisheries in general. So we can get better data to provide better fisheries management in Indonesia. So I think we have to start to move to this exposed fisheries tax collection base. And then, so why don't we put this tax like based on this GT rather than tonnage of catch? Yeah? So you prefer impose this tax based on GT. Actually, as we identify in this study, if we impose the tax based on this GT, it's the treatment on the model is just like fixed cost, like Satoshi said before. So it not give the implication on the effort behavior, yeah, because it's only for apa namanya it can be we can set that this tax based on GT is like the fixed cost and not give the implication on the catch behavior or the effort behavior, but more on the entry and exit, entry and exit behavior, because it is fixed cost.
Sorry, Bolin, I think Pak Aco want to respond to your statement. Yes, please.
Sorry, yeah, Alin, can I just clarify what I mean by the ad valorem tax is that if you still have this, what is it, license tax, both any type of vessel should pay tax based on the GT, but per unit of GT. So not binary, small or large, but everybody based on the GT. Say, for example, 1 juta per GT. So if they, or 100,000 per GT. And then for the catch, it's also ad valorem. So per.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So it avoids them being sunk costs and then drop from their decision making.
Yeah. It's actually a good idea. So actually, in the beginning, we want to also make simulation on the license tax, based on GT, and also the production tax based on the tonnage, and combine these two tax both. But maybe we have planned to do that in our further research. But for now, we make this boundary just for production tax.
Okay.
This is very interesting to. Maybe if we put this license tax simulation, we can also determine the optimal rate of this license and production tax. It's a very good idea. For Mbak Lydia about the confidence of the data, actually we're not quite confident of the data because in the technicalities in collecting this tax, the KKP in this case is the GPT has many challenge and problem. For example, one of them is the price of fish. So the price of fish is not updated since 2012, I think. So the price of fish itself is not timely adjusted. And then the other problem is the reliability of the GT itself. So the ship has to be validated by, we call it KIR in Indonesia, but the credibility of the institution managed by Ministry of Transportation, but I think the reliability is better now, but I don't know, maybe we can still see a bottleneck here, but many things happen in this tax collection. So we have to invest in conducting a good monitoring data collection to make the realization and the target is well managed. Okay, maybe I will give to Satoshi to answer the rest. Sorry, Satoshi.
Okay, let me try. Okay, so the first things I want to say is that this model doesn't necessarily to replicate what is happening in the fisheries or what will happen in the fisheries. What this model tells us is what would the fishery look like if we live in a perfect world. So there is there is a perfect monitoring. Everybody comply with what the government said they to do, right? And in reality, we know that it never happens. But our model suggests that even in such perfect environment, the current system, I don't think the current systems address this issue of sustainability in the most efficient way. Because to achieve the sustainability of the fisheries, we don't just restrict the number of boats, right? We don't restrict just how many people are catching fish. We need to restrict who are participating in the fisheries, which is done by PPP and PhD. But at the same time, we need to restrict how much each current participant catch. And this second part is not addressed by the current systems. And our suggestion here is why not to use the price mechanisms? So let them charge their, so as and Arianto said, based on their fishing activities, we can they have to internalize the externalities, right? And our suggestion here is, why don't we look at their revenues? But of course, this can be done in terms of catch. This can be done in terms of effort. And again, I think in an environment like in Indonesia, the biggest challenge is the monitoring, particularly the small vessels, right? Then here, I think we need a more flexible idea outside of the model. So for instance, if there are 30,000 small vessels are operating, it is not realistic and it is too expensive to monitor individually. Then we need to have some proxy or maybe aggregation of the small vessel at the village level or at some community level. And based on that, can we design these price-based mechanisms to address the second issue of sustainability, which is how much fish individual vessel is catching. And the Lydia's points about the biomass. So I think that's very, very good point, because increasing the biomass is not necessary to be a goal of the fisheries management. Because if that's objective, maybe the best way is just stop fishing so that we can have the maximum possible fish stocks in the oceans. But obviously we don't do that because there is a trade-off. So like countries in Australia, what we do is we have a reference point. So the Australian government decided that our objective is to maximize the economic benefit from the fisheries profit, from the fishing activity, right? And to achieve the objective, what is a target biomass? And the biomass level is always evaluated against this target reference point. So I think the same things need to be done here. I think in Indonesia, we typically use MSY. So then we do need to evaluate, whether we are conserving, we are protecting too much fish stocks, or we are not, we are overfishing. So the biomass itself, we need to carefully look at the numbers. So in other words, in relation to the target reference point. Okay, I stop here.
Yep, thank you, Ibu Alin and Mr. Satoshi for the answer. So I think we still have approximately 10 or 11 minutes. So if all the participants still have questions or comments regarding this presentation, please. Or maybe you're comfortable in Bahasa, so I can translate it, actually. No question? All right, okay. So I think we are already reaching the later part of our webinar. If no one still wants to question, I think I just have to make sure that no one wants to question again. Okay, so thank you for Ibu Alin and also Mr. Satoshi for your nice, very, very nice work and very, very nice presentation. And also I want to thank all the participants who participate in this morning's webinar. And also thank you for FKP for hosting this webinar as well. So on the name of the organizer, I want to apologize if there are some things which is inappropriate or you think which is lacked from this webinar. I hope that this webinar can be useful for not only for the academic reason, but maybe for the policy making decision. And I think this webinar will also playable online, just in case you want to watch it again in the future, or maybe you want to recommend it to your colleagues or your friends. Maybe you can find it in FKP YouTube if there is. Yeah, maybe we can inform you with how you can access the recording version of today's webinar. So stay healthy, stay safe, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Okay, just want to say that tomorrow we will also have another FKP. It will be on political competition and its economic impact. So 10 o'clock tomorrow, the last FKP of the month. So that's all for me. Sorry, I closed my video because it seems that it's my internet is not stable. Thanks Satoshi and Alin for the presentation.
Thank you, Mbak Lydia, Bisu, Satoshi. See you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
See you.
Thanks very much, everyone. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.